The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Apache Junction depot, and Lila Patterson stepped down into the Arizona dust, with one hand pressed against her swollen belly, and the other gripping a worn carpet bag that held everything she owned in this world. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town, and she could feel curious eyes turning toward her from every direction, taking in her condition with the kind of judgment she had learned to expect over the past 7 months. She had come here with nothing but a name scrawled on a piece of paper, a distant cousin who had promised work at the general store. But as she stood there in the September heat of 1878, watching the stagecoach pull away in a cloud of dust, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The main street of Apache Junction stretched before her, a collection of weathered wooden buildings that seemed to shimmer in the heat. She could see a saloon, a blacksmith shop, the general store she hoped would be her salvation, and at the far end of town, a small white church that looked almost out of place among the rougher establishments. Lila took a deep breath and started walking, feeling the weight of her pregnancy with every step. She was only 22 years old, but she felt ancient, worn down by months of shame and whispered accusations back in Kansas City, where she had lived with her parents, until they had made it clear she was no longer welcome under their roof. The man who had put this child in her belly had been a smooth-talking gambler named Charles Whitmore, and he had vanished the moment she told him about the baby. She had been foolish enough to believe his promises of marriage, foolish enough to give herself to him in a moment of passion that now seemed like it belonged to someone else's life. Her parents had called her a disgrace, and her father had thrust the piece of paper with her cousin's address into her hand and told her to leave before she brought any more shame to the family name. Lila pushed open the door to Patterson's general store, hoping that the shared surname was more than just coincidence. A bell jingled overhead, and she found herself in a dim interior that smelled of leather and dried beans and coffee. Behind the counter stood a thin woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the moment their eyes met, Lila saw the recognition followed immediately by disapproval. "You must be Lila," the woman said, her voice flat and unwelcoming. "I'm Constance Patterson. I suppose you're my late husband's cousin's daughter, though I must say your letter failed to mention certain important details about your situation." Lila felt her cheeks burning. "I apologize for the omission, Mrs. Patterson. I was afraid you might not let me come if you knew." "You were right about that," Constance said sharply. She looked Lila up and down with an expression that made Lila want to sink into the floorboards. "I run a respectable establishment here. What you're carrying is evidence of sin, girl, and I won't have that kind of scandal associated with my store." The words hit Lila like a physical blow. "Please," she said, hating the desperation in her own voice. "I have nowhere else to go. I can work hard. I won't cause any trouble. I just need a chance." Constance's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm sorry, but no. I suggest you get back on the next stagecoach heading east. There's nothing for you here in Apache Junction." Lila stood there frozen, feeling the last of her hope crumbling away. She had spent nearly all her money on the journey here. She did not have enough for a return ticket, and even if she did, she had nowhere to return to. The room seemed to spin slightly, and she realized she had not eaten since early that morning. Her hand tightened on the handle of her carpet bag, and she forced herself to nod. "I understand," she said quietly, though she did not understand at all. She did not understand how people could be so cruel, how the world could be so unforgiving of a single mistake. She turned and walked back out into the blazing sunshine, and this time when the tears came, she could not stop them. She found herself walking without any clear destination, past the saloon where rough laughter spilled out into the street, past the blacksmith shop where a man was hammering at a glowing horseshoe, sending sparks flying into the air. She walked until she reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland dotted with mesquite and sagebrush. And there she sank down onto a large rock and let herself cry in earnest. She did not know how long she sat there, but the sun had moved considerably across the sky when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She looked up, wiping at her tear-stained face, and saw a man riding toward her on a sturdy bay horse. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty range clothes and a hat that shaded his face from the sun. As he drew closer, she could see that he was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair and eyes that were a startling shade of green against his sun-bronzed skin. He reined in his horse a few feet away and tipped his hat to her. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle, "you look like you might be in some trouble. Can I help you with something?" Lila almost laughed at that, but it came out more like a sob. "Unless you can give me a place to stay and work that will accept a woman in my condition, I do not think anyone can help me." The man dismounted in one fluid motion and came closer, and Lila could see his face more clearly now. He had strong features, a straight nose and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. But there was kindness in his eyes that made something in her chest ache. He looked at her belly without any of the disgust or judgment she had come to expect, just a calm acceptance that made her want to cry all over again. "My name is Yates Ormond," he said. "I run a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It's not much, just me and my foreman and a few hired hands, but we could use someone to help with the cooking and the housekeeping. The bunkhouse has been getting pretty rough without a woman's touch, and I'll be honest, none of us are worth a damn in the kitchen." Lila stared at him, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "You would hire me?" "Even knowing about the baby," Yates shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I figure a baby needs to eat same as anyone else. You look like you know how to work, and that's all that matters to me. I'll pay you fair wages, and you can have the small cabin behind the main house. It used to be where my aunt lived before she passed, but it's been empty for 2 years now. It's nothing fancy, but it's got a good roof and a fireplace, and it would give you privacy. Why would you do this for me?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." Yates looked away for a moment, out toward the vast expanse of desert that surrounded them. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be judged for things that are beyond your control. My mother was Apache, and my father was a white rancher who married her when that kind of thing was even less acceptable than it is now. I grew up being called all kinds of names, being told I did not belong in either world. So when I see someone else being judged unfairly, I figure the least I can do is offer a helping hand." Lila felt something shift in her chest, a warm flutter of hope that she had thought was dead. "I accept your offer, Mr. Ormond, and I promise you will not regret it. I will work harder than anyone you have ever hired. Just call me Yates," he said, extending his hand to help her up from the rock. "And I believe you. Come on, let's get you out to the ranch before this sun gets any hotter. You can ride with me, and I'll send one of the hands back for your bag later." He helped her up onto his horse and then swung up behind her, and Lila found herself acutely aware of the solid warmth of his body at her back, the strength in the arms that reached around her to hold the reins. They rode out of Apache Junction at an easy pace, and as the town disappeared behind them, Lila felt like she was leaving one life behind and starting another. The Ormond Ranch was exactly as Yates had described it, nothing fancy but solid and well-maintained. The main house was built of adobe with a wide porch that wrapped around the front, and there were several outbuildings including a barn, a stable, and the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived. The small cabin Yates had mentioned sat about 50 yards behind the main house, partially shaded by a gnarled old cottonwood tree that must have been drawing water from some underground source. Yates helped her down from the horse and led her to the cabin, pushing open the door to reveal a single large room with a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a fireplace, and a few shelves built into the walls. It was dusty and had the musty smell of a place that had been closed up for too long, but Lila thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I know it needs some work," Yates said, sounding almost apologetic. "But I'll have the boys help clean it up tomorrow, get you some fresh linens and supplies. For tonight, you can eat supper with us at the main house, and I will make sure you have everything you need." "It's perfect," Lila said, and she meant it. "Thank you, Yates. I do not know how I will ever repay you for this kindness." He smiled at her then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Just make us some decent food and keep the house from falling into complete chaos. That will be payment enough." Over the next few weeks, Lila settled into a rhythm at the Ormond ranch that felt almost like coming home. She woke with the sun each morning and made breakfast for Yates and his foreman, a gruff older man named Samuel, who had worked for Yates's father and stayed on after the older Ormond had died 5 years earlier. There were 3 other ranch hands who came and went, tending to the cattle and horses, and Lila quickly learned all their preferences when it came to meals. She cleaned the main house from top to bottom, washing windows that had not been properly cleaned in years, beating the dust out of rugs and organizing the cluttered shelves. She mended clothes and darned socks, and in her spare time, she worked on the small cabin, making it into a real home. Yates had been true to his word, providing her with everything she needed and never once making her feel like an object of charity. What surprised her most was how comfortable she felt around him. Despite her condition and the shame she had carried for so long, Yates treated her with a respect and gentleness that made her feel almost normal again. He would sit at the kitchen table in the evenings after supper, going over the ranch accounts while she cleaned up, and they would talk about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up half Apache in a world that did not want to accept him, about learning to work cattle from his father, and learning to track and hunt from his mother's people. He told her about the struggles of keeping a ranch running when the big cattle companies were trying to squeeze out the smaller operations, about his dreams of building something that would last. And slowly, carefully, Lila began to tell him her own story. She told him about growing up in Kansas City, about her strict parents who had always expected perfection from her, about Charles Whitmore and his lies and her own foolish heart that had believed him. She told him about the moment she realized she was pregnant, about the fear and shame that had consumed her, about her parents' rejection, and the long journey to Arizona. "I was so stupid," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and gold. "I thought he loved me. I thought we would get married and have a family, and instead, I threw away everything for a man who did not even care enough to say goodbye." Yates was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "You were not stupid. You were trusting, and there's a difference. He was the one who was wrong, not you. He was the one who broke his promises and ran away from his responsibilities." "The world does not see it that way," Lila said bitterly. "The world sees me as a fallen woman, and it will see my child as a bastard." "Then the world is wrong," Yates said with such conviction that Lila turned to look at him in surprise. "You're one of the strongest, hardest-working people I have ever met, Lila Patterson. You have been dealt a hard hand, and instead of giving up, you're fighting for yourself and for your baby. That takes courage, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool. Lila felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they were different from the tears she had shed so many times before. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of something else she was not quite ready to name. As the weeks turned into months, Lila's belly grew larger, and the baby's movements became stronger and more frequent. She would sometimes stop in the middle of her work, one hand pressed to her side, feeling the life growing inside her with a mixture of wonder and fear. She had never planned to become a mother like this, unmarried and alone, but now that it was happening, she found herself falling in love with the little person she had not yet met. Yates seemed fascinated by her pregnancy in a way that was both endearing and slightly embarrassing. He would ask her questions about what it felt like, whether the baby was kicking, if she needed anything to make her more comfortable. He had a chair with extra cushions brought to the kitchen so she could sit while she worked, and he made sure she was never carrying anything too heavy or overexerting herself. "You do not have to worry about me so much," she told him one afternoon in late November as he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry for her. "I am not made of glass." "I know that," he said, but he kept hold of the basket anyway. "But there's no harm in making things a little easier when I can." Samuel, the old foreman, noticed the way Yates hovered around Lila and gave his employer a knowing look that Lila pretended not to see. She had noticed the way her heart sped up whenever Yates entered a room, the way she found herself looking for excuses to talk to him, the way his rare smiles made her feel warm all over. But she told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural affection that came from being treated with kindness after so much cruelty. She could not let herself think it was anything more than that. She was carrying another man's child, and she had already proven how poor her judgment was when it came to matters of the heart. The last thing she wanted was to misinterpret Yates's kindness for something deeper and end up hurt again. But as December arrived and the nights grew colder, Lila found it harder and harder to deny what she was feeling. She had fallen in love with Yates Ormond, with his quiet strength and his gentle hands, and the way he looked at her like she was something precious. She loved the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, and the way he talked to his horses like they were old friends. She loved how he treated his ranch hands with respect, how he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself, how he had taken in a stray dog that showed up one day and named it Duke like it had always belonged there. She loved him, and it terrified her because she knew she had no right to those feelings, not when she was about to give birth to another man's child. It was a cold evening in mid-December when everything changed. Lila was in the kitchen preparing supper, stirring a pot of beef stew while fresh bread baked in the oven, when she felt a sudden sharp pain low in her belly that made her gasp and grab the edge of the table. She waited, breathing carefully, but then the pain came again, stronger this time, and she knew with certainty that the baby was coming. "Yates," she called out, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "Yates, I need you." He came running from the other room, his face going pale when he saw her doubled over. "Is it the baby?" "Yes," she said through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. "I think it is time." What followed was a blur of activity. Yates sent one of the ranch hands racing into town to fetch the midwife, while he helped Lila to her cabin and got her settled on the bed. He built up the fire until the room was warm, brought water and clean linens, and never once left her side even when the pains got worse, and she was sure she must be scaring him with her cries. "You are doing so well," he kept saying, holding her hand and letting her squeeze as hard as she needed. "You are so strong, Lila. Just keep breathing." The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen who had delivered half the babies in Apache Junction, arrived about an hour later and took charge of the situation with brisk efficiency. She examined Lila and announced that the baby was coming fast, which Lila could have told her from the intensity of the contractions that seemed to be coming one on top of another. "You should leave now, Mr. Ormond," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "This is no place for a man." But Lila tightened her grip on Yates's hand and said, "Please, I want him to stay." Mrs. Chen looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Lila's face must have convinced her because she just nodded and said, "Very well, but stay out of my way and do what I tell you." The next few hours were the hardest of Lila's life. The pain was unlike anything she had imagined, wave after wave that threatened to drown her, but every time she felt like she could not go on, Yates was there, his steady presence grounding her. He wiped her face with a cool cloth, whispered encouragement in her ear, and never once looked away even when things got messy and difficult. And then, just as the first light of dawn was beginning to creep through the cabin window, the baby came in a rush of blood and fluid, and the most beautiful sound Lila had ever heard, a thin wail that spoke of life and possibility and hope. "It is a girl, Mrs. Chen announced, placing the tiny, squirming bundle on Lila's chest. "A healthy baby girl." Lila looked down at her daughter, at the tiny perfect face and the shock of dark hair and the little fists waving in the air, and felt her heart crack open with a love so fierce it hurt. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama." She looked up to find Yates staring at the baby with an expression of such wonder that it made her breath catch. He reached out tentatively and let the baby grip his finger, and Lila saw his eyes go bright with unshed tears. "She is beautiful," he said softly, "just like her mother." Mrs. Chen finished cleaning up and gave Lila instructions for caring for the baby, then took her leave with a promise to check on them in a few days. As soon as she was gone, Yates pulled up a chair next to the bed and sat down, unable to take his eyes off the baby. "What are you going to name her?" he asked. Lila had thought about names for months, but now that she was looking at her daughter, only one felt right. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Me Patterson." "Sarah," Yates repeated, smiling. "That is a good, strong name." They sat there in comfortable silence for a while, watching Sarah sleep, and Lila felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness that she had not felt in a very long time. But underlying it all was a thread of worry about the future. She had savings from her wages, but not much, and she knew that taking care of a baby would make working much harder. What if Yates decided she was more trouble than she was worth? What if he sent her away? As if reading her thoughts, Yates said quietly, "Lila, I want to talk to you about something." Her heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. He is going to tell me I need to leave, but what he said next was so unexpected that for a moment she was sure she had misheard him. "I want to marry you," Yates said, his green eyes steady on hers. "I want to give Sarah my name and raise her as my own. I want to take care of both of you, not as your employer but as your husband." Lila felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "What? Yates, you cannot be serious. This is not your responsibility. Sarah is not your child." "Then the baby gets my name too," Yates said firmly, moving to kneel beside the bed so he was eye level with her. "Lila, I know this is sudden, and I know you probably think I am crazy, but I have thought about this a lot over the past few months. I care about you. More than care about you, if I am being honest. I have been falling in love with you since the day I found you crying at the edge of town, and watching you these past months has only made those feelings stronger." "But I am carrying another man's child," Lila said, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. "I come with so much baggage, so much shame." "You do not come with shame," Yates said fiercely. "You come with strength and courage and a beautiful daughter who deserves to grow up with a father who will love her and protect her. I can be that father, Lila. I want to be that father. And I want to be your husband if you will have me. Lila looked down at Sarah, then back at Yates, and felt tears streaming down her face. I love you, she whispered. I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I love you, Yates. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you offered me a job without judging me. Then say yes, Yates said, taking her free hand in both of his. Marry me. Let me give you and Sarah the life you both deserve. Yes, Lila said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. Yates leaned forward and kissed her gently, carefully, like she was something precious that might break. It was Lila's first real kiss, despite everything that had happened with Charles, and it was perfect in its tenderness. They were married 3 weeks later in the small white church at the end of Apache Junction's Main Street. Lila wore a simple dress of pale blue that Mrs. Chen had helped her alter to fit her post-pregnancy body, and Yates wore his best suit with his dark hair neatly combed back. Samuel stood as witness, along with a few of the ranch hands who had become like family over the past months. Sarah slept peacefully in Mrs. Chen's arms throughout the ceremony. The preacher, Reverend Thompson, had initially been reluctant to perform the ceremony when he learned about Sarah's parentage, but Yates had made it very clear that he was marrying Lila with full knowledge and acceptance of her past, and that Sarah would be his daughter in every way that mattered. There had been something in Yates's tone that discouraged any further argument. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Yates took Sarah from Mrs. Chen's arms and held her while he kissed his new bride, and Lila felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They signed the marriage certificate, and underneath Sarah's name, where it asked for the father, Yates wrote his own name without hesitation. She is mine now, he said simply. Sarah Me Ormond. The reception was a simple affair at the ranch, with food and music and genuine celebration from the people who had come to care about them. Even Constance Patterson made an appearance, though she looked distinctly uncomfortable the entire time and left early. Lila found she did not care. She had found her family here with Yates and Sarah, and that was all that mattered. As winter gave way to spring, Lila settled into married life with a joy she had never expected to feel. Yates moved her and Sarah into the main house, into the bedroom that had once belonged to his parents, and every morning she woke up next to him feeling like she must be living in a dream. He was patient with her nervousness about the physical side of marriage, never pushing her, always letting her set the pace as she learned to trust again. Sarah thrived, growing bigger and stronger every day. She had Lila's brown eyes and what looked like it might become her father's dark curling hair, and she had the loudest cry Lila had ever heard from such a small person. Yates was completely besotted with her. He would come in from working the ranch covered in dust and sweat and head straight for wherever Sarah was, talking to her in a gentle voice that made Lila fall in love with him all over again. You are going to spoil her rotten, Lila teased one evening as she watched him walk Sarah around the living room, bouncing her gently while singing an old Apache lullaby his mother had sung to him. That is my right as her father, Yates said with mock seriousness, but his eyes were twinkling. Every little girl should be spoiled by her father. I never thought I would have this, Lila said softly. A real family, a husband who loves me, a home where I feel safe. Sometimes I still wake up afraid it is all going to disappear. Yates came to sit beside her on the sofa, settling Sarah in the crook of his arm. It is not going to disappear. This is real, Lila. We are real. And we are going to build a good life here together, the three of us. He paused, then added with a slightly mischievous smile, although I was thinking that maybe eventually Sarah might like a brother or sister. What do you think about that? Lila felt her cheeks flush, but she smiled back. I think that sounds wonderful. But maybe we should wait until Sarah is sleeping through the night before we start thinking about adding another baby to the mix. Fair enough, Yates said, leaning over to kiss her. I am a patient man. The seasons turned, spring giving way to the brutal heat of an Arizona summer, and then the blessed relief of fall. Sarah learned to smile and then to laugh, a sound that filled the house with joy. Lila threw herself into making the ranch house a real home, sewing curtains for the windows and planting a vegetable garden that actually managed to produce, despite the harsh conditions. She had never thought of herself as a farmer's wife, but she discovered she loved this life, loved the rhythm of the days and the satisfaction of hard work. Yates taught her to ride, patient with her initial nervousness around the horses, and soon they were taking rides together in the evenings after the work was done, with Sarah secured in a sling against Lila's chest. They would ride out to the edge of the property and watch the sunset, and Yates would tell her his dreams for expanding the ranch, for building something that would last for generations. I want Sarah to inherit something solid, he told her one evening as they sat together watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. I want her to know that she comes from strength, that she has roots here that run deep. She already has that, Lila said, reaching over to take his hand. She has you as her father. That is the most important inheritance you could give her. There were challenges, of course. There were always people in town who looked at them with judgment, who whispered about the fallen woman who had trapped the half-breed rancher with another man's baby. But Yates had taught Lila to hold her head high and ignore the gossips. And gradually, as people saw that their marriage was real and lasting, even the whispers began to fade. Samuel became like a grandfather to Sarah, carving her toys out of wood and teaching her to recognize the different bird calls. The ranch hands treated Lila with respect and genuine affection, and she made sure they had good meals and mended clothes and a boss who valued their work. When Sarah turned 1 year old, they had a small party at the ranch with cake and presents, and more love than Lila had ever imagined possible. Sarah sat in her high chair and demolished a piece of cake with her hands, getting frosting in her hair and all over her face, and everyone laughed at her delighted giggles. That night, after Sarah had been bathed and put to bed, Lila stood at the window of their bedroom looking out at the desert landscape silvered by moonlight. Yates came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "I am thinking about how much has changed in a year," Lila said. "This time last year, Sarah was just a few weeks old, and I was still getting used to the idea of being married to you, and now I cannot imagine my life any other way." "I cannot either," Yates said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You and Sarah are everything to me, Lila. You know that, right?" "I know," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "And you are everything to us. You have given me back my life, Yates. You have given me hope and love and a future I never thought I would have. I do not know how I got so lucky." "I am the lucky one," Yates said, cupping her face in his hands. "I found you when I needed you most, even though I did not realize I was looking. You brought light into a life that had become too dark, too lonely. You taught me what it means to have a family." They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that had grown over months of learning each other. And afterward, as Lila lay in Yates's arms listening to his heartbeat slow, she thought about how far she had come. She had arrived in Apache Junction broken and desperate, and she had found not just survival but genuine happiness. She had found a man who loved her not despite her past, but because of everything that past had taught her, who had chosen to be a father to a child who was not his by blood, but was entirely his by love. As autumn deepened and the first hints of winter began to touch the desert, Lila discovered she was pregnant again. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had wanted to be certain before telling Yates. This time, the pregnancy felt entirely different. There was no shame or fear, only joy and anticipation. This baby had been created out of love, and it would be born into a family that was ready and eager to welcome it. She told Yates one evening after supper, simply reaching for his hand and placing it on her still flat belly. He looked at her in surprise, then understanding dawned in his eyes, and he let out a whoop of joy that brought Samuel running in from the bunkhouse to see what was wrong. "We are having a baby," Yates announced, picking Lila up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he should be careful. "Sarah is going to be a big sister." "It is about time," Samuel said gruffly, but he was smiling. "This ranch needs more young ones running around." Sarah, now toddling around on unsteady legs and saying a few words, seemed to sense that something exciting was happening and joined in the celebration by clapping her hands and laughing. Yates scooped her up and held her while he kissed Lila, and Lila felt so full of happiness she thought she might actually float away. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Lila's belly grew, Yates became even more protective and doting than he had been during her pregnancy with Sarah. He insisted she rest more, brought her tea and made sure she was eating enough, and took over many of her household duties despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of working. "I know you are capable," he said firmly, "but that does not mean you have to do everything yourself. Let me take care of you for once." Lila had learned to accept his care with grace, understanding that it came from a place of love rather than any belief that she was weak. She spent more time with Sarah, teaching her words and songs, reading to her from the few books they had in the house. Sarah had started calling Yates Papa a few months earlier, and every time she said it, Lila saw Yates's face light up with pride and joy. Winter came, and with it the occasional cold snap that reminded them they were in the high desert. Lila spent her days preparing for the new baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, setting up the cradle that Yates had built with his own hands. Sarah helped in her own toddler way, bringing Lila things she thought the baby might need, including one memorable afternoon when she brought an entire collection of rocks from outside. "For baby," she said seriously, dumping them in the cradle. "That is very thoughtful, sweetheart," Lila said, hiding her smile. "But I think the baby would be more comfortable with blankets. Why do not we put these rocks in a special box for the baby to look at when they are older?" As her due date approached, Lila found herself reflecting on how different this pregnancy felt from her first. She was not afraid of the birth this time, knowing what to expect, and more importantly, she was not afraid of what came after. She had Yates by her side, she had Sarah, and she had a home and a community that accepted her. She had everything she needed. The baby came on a cold February morning in 1880, arriving with much less drama than Sarah had. Lila had felt the first contractions at dawn and had calmly woken Yates to let him know it was time. They sent Samuel to fetch Mrs. Chen while Yates settled Lila into their bedroom and made sure she was comfortable. Sarah, not quite understanding what was happening but sensing it was important, sat quietly in the corner with her doll. The labor was shorter this time, only a few hours before Mrs. Chen announced that the baby was crowning. Yates held Lila's hand and coached her through the final pushes, and then there was a lusty cry and Mrs. Chen was saying, "You have a son, Mrs. Ormond. A fine, healthy boy." Lila looked at the baby boy Mrs. Chen placed in her arms at his red, scrunched-up face and his shock of dark hair so much like his father's, and felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the family." Yates was staring at his son with an expression of awe and disbelief. "He is really here," he said softly. "We have a son." "We do," Lila said, smiling through her tears. "We have a son and a daughter and the most wonderful family anyone could ask for." They named him James William Ormond, after Yates's father, and from the moment he entered the world, he was clearly his father's son. He had Yates's green eyes and his determined cry, and as he grew, his stubborn streak and his gentle heart. Sarah was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding time, and Yates had to gently remind her that the baby was not a toy. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The house was louder and messier and fuller of love than ever before. Lila sometimes felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work involved in caring for an infant and a toddler while still managing the household. But Yates was always there to help, never considering it beneath him to change a diaper or rock a crying baby in the middle of the night. "We are partners in this," he told her when she apologized for waking him yet again with James's cries. "You do not have to do it all alone." As spring arrived and the desert began to bloom with unexpected color, Lila took stock of her life and marveled at how much had changed in less than 2 years. She had arrived in Apache Junction as a desperate, pregnant woman with no prospects and no hope. And now she was a wife and mother with a home she loved, and a husband she adored, and 2 beautiful children who brought her joy every single day. One evening in late spring, after the children were in bed and she and Yates were sitting on the porch watching the stars come out, Lila said, "Do you ever regret it, taking me in that day? All the complications I brought into your life?" Yates turned to look at her with surprise. "Regret it?" "Lila, that was the best decision I ever made. You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me. Why would you even ask that?" "I do not know," Lila said, looking down at her hands. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life. That you chose to love me even though I came with so much baggage. That you chose to be a father to Sarah even though she was not yours." "She is mine," Yates said firmly. "In every way that matters, she is my daughter, and you did not come with baggage, Lila. You came with strength and courage and the most beautiful heart I have ever known. I am the one who should be grateful that you agreed to marry me." "I am grateful every day," Lila said softly. "For you, for our children, for this life we have built together. I never thought I could be this happy. I thought my one mistake had ruined everything, but instead it brought me here to you." "It was not a mistake," Yates said, pulling her close. "It was part of your journey, and it made you who you are. And who you are is exactly the woman I need, the woman I love." They sat there in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the distant call of a coyote and the rustle of the wind through the mesquite. Lila thought about Charles Whitmore, the man who had put Sarah in her belly, and realized she did not feel any anger toward him anymore. If he had not abandoned her, she never would have come to Arizona. She never would have met Yates. She never would have found this life and this love. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for everything, for giving me a chance when no one else would, for loving Sarah as your own, for building this family with me, for making me believe in happy endings again." "You do not have to thank me," Yates said, kissing her temple. "This is what love is supposed to be. It is supposed to lift you up and make you feel safe and give you a place to belong. That is what you have given me too." As the months passed, the ranch continued to prosper. Yates was a skilled rancher and businessman, and with Lila managing the household and accounts, they made a formidable team. They were able to hire more ranch hands, expand their herd, and even buy some adjacent land when it became available. The small operation Yates had inherited from his father was growing into something substantial, something that would provide security for their children and their children's children. Sarah grew into a bright, curious child who followed her father around whenever she could, asking endless questions about the cattle and the horses and the desert. Yates was endlessly patient with her, explaining things in terms she could understand and teaching her to respect the animals and the land. James was still small but showing signs of being just as inquisitive as his sister, and Lila could already see that she was going to have her hands full with the two of them. The town of Apache Junction was growing too, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Lila had made friends with some of the other women in town, particularly Mrs. Chen, and a young schoolteacher named Ellen who had arrived from Boston the previous year. She no longer felt the sting of judgment when she walked down the main street. Most people had come to accept her as Mrs. Ormond, the capable wife of one of the area's most respected ranchers. There were still occasional whispers, particularly from some of the older, more rigid members of the community, but Lila had learned to let those roll off her back. She knew who she was now. She knew her worth. And more importantly, she knew she was loved. One day in late summer, as Lila was in town getting supplies, she ran into Constance Patterson. The older woman had aged noticeably in the 2 years since Lila had first arrived, and there was a sadness in her eyes that had not been there before. "Mrs. Ormond," Constance said stiffly, nodding in greeting. "Mrs. Patterson," Lila replied, keeping her voice neutral. She had no particular fondness for the woman who had turned her away in her hour of need, but she had no energy for holding grudges either. Constance hesitated, then said, "I heard you and your husband are doing well, that you have 2 children now." "We do," Lila said. "Sarah is almost 2.5 and James just turned 6 months old. I also heard that your husband treats your daughter as his own, that he gave her his name." "He did," Lila said, feeling defensive on behalf of her family. "He is her father in every way that matters." Constance was quiet for a moment, then she said something that surprised Lila. "I owe you an apology. When you came to me looking for help, I turned you away out of concern for my reputation and my business. I told myself I was being righteous, but really I was just being cruel. You needed help, and I refused to give it. I am sorry for that." Lila stared at the older woman in shock. She had never expected an apology, had long since made peace with Constance's rejection. "I appreciate you saying that," she said carefully. "It was a difficult time for me." "You have done well for yourself despite my rejection," Constance said, "or perhaps because of it. You found someone who saw your worth when I could not. You should be proud of what you have built." "I am," Lila said simply. "I have a good life and a wonderful family. I could not ask for more." After Constance walked away, Lila stood there for a moment feeling strangely light. The apology had lifted something she had not realized she was still carrying, a small weight of resentment and hurt. She finished her shopping and headed home to the ranch, eager to see her family. When she arrived, she found Yates in the yard with Sarah perched on his shoulders, both of them laughing as he pretended to be a bucking bronco. James was inside napping under Samuel's watchful eye, and the old foreman waved at her from the porch. "Your husband is going to break his neck playing like that," Samuel called out, but he was smiling. "Then I will just have to patch him up," Lila called back, smiling too as she watched Yates set Sarah down and swing her around in circles until she was shrieking with laughter. This was her life now, these moments of simple joy and laughter and love. This was what she had fought for, what Yates had given her when he had offered his hand that day at the edge of town. A family, a home, a future. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Lila and Yates sat together in their bedroom. Yates was reading a book about cattle breeding while Lila worked on mending one of Sarah's dresses that had gotten torn during the day's adventures. I ran into Constance Patterson in town today, Lila said, breaking the comfortable silence. She apologized for turning me away when I first arrived. Yates looked up from his book, eyebrows raised. That must have been surprising. It was, Lila admitted, but it felt good too. Like the last piece of my old life finally fell into place. I am not that scared, desperate woman anymore. I am someone different now, someone stronger. You were always strong, Yates said, setting his book aside and pulling her into his arms. You just needed someone to remind you of that. You did more than remind me, Lila said, settling against his chest and listening to his heartbeat. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You gave me a chance to become the person I was meant to be. We gave each other that chance, Yates corrected gently. You taught me how to have a family, how to open my heart again after years of keeping everyone at a distance. You taught me that love does not have to be perfect to be real. They sat there holding each other, and Lila thought about all the twists and turns that had led her to this moment. If Charles Whitmore had not abandoned her, if her parents had not cast her out, if the stagecoach had not stopped in Apache Junction, if Yates had not been riding past the edge of town that particular afternoon, her life would have been completely different. She would have missed all of this, the love and the family and the home she had built with this incredible man. I love you, she said, turning to kiss him. I love you so much it still sometimes takes my breath away. I love you too, Yates said, kissing her back with a tenderness that made her melt. Forever, Lila. You and me and our children forever. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the natural rhythms of ranch life. There were good years and hard years. Years when the cattle prices were high and years when drought threatened their livelihood. Through it all, Lila and Yates faced every challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each passing season. Sarah grew into a spirited young girl who could ride a horse as well as any of the ranch hands, and who had her father's way with animals. James was quieter but equally capable, showing an early aptitude for numbers that made Yates think he might grow up to be the business mind behind the ranch's operations. And 3 years after James was born, they welcomed another daughter, Emma Rose, who had her mother's gentle nature and her father's green eyes. The house that had once seemed so quiet was now filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of 3 children. Lila sometimes felt exhausted by the demands of motherhood, but she never once regretted the path her life had taken. Every time she looked at her children or her husband, she felt grateful for the journey that had brought her here. Samuel grew older but remained a fixture on the ranch, teaching the children everything he knew about cattle and horses and the land. He had become like family, joining them for Sunday dinners and holidays, and the children called him Grandpa Sam without anyone ever having suggested it. When Sarah was 7 years old, she came to Lila with questions about where babies came from and how families were made. Lila had been preparing for this conversation, knowing that eventually she would need to tell Sarah the truth about her parentage. But when the moment came, she found herself uncertain about what to say. She talked to Yates about it that night, and he took her hands and said, "Tell her the truth. Tell her that she was born out of a situation that was complicated, but that she was always loved. Tell her that I chose to be her father the moment I met her mother, and that choice has never wavered for a single second." So Lila sat Sarah down one afternoon and told her the story in terms a 7-year-old could understand. She explained that there had been another man before Yates, a man who had not been ready to be a father, but that Yates had wanted to be her papa from the very beginning. She told Sarah that family was not just about blood but about love and choice and commitment. Sarah listened carefully, her young face serious, and when Lila finished, she said, "So Papa chose to be my papa." "He did," Lila said. "That means he wanted me. Sarah said thoughtfully. Some papas have to have their children because that is what happens. But Papa picked me because he wanted to. That is special. Lila felt tears stinging her eyes. Yes, baby, that is exactly right. You are very, very special to your papa. I know, Sarah said simply. He tells me all the time. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, Lila told Yates about the conversation. He listened with his usual quiet intensity, and when she finished, he said, "She is right, you know. I did not have to love her, but I did. From the first moment I saw her, this tiny, perfect baby, I knew she was mine. Biology does not determine love. Choice does." "You are an amazing father," Lila said, feeling overwhelmed with emotion. "To all our children, but especially to Sarah. You have given her something so precious, the knowledge that she is chosen and wanted and loved." "She has made it easy," Yates said with a smile. "All our children have." "They are the best thing we have ever done, Lila." As Sarah grew older, the conversation about her parentage never became a source of shame or confusion. She knew her story, and she was proud of it. She would tell people matter-of-factly that her papa had chosen to be her father, and there was no trace of embarrassment or uncertainty in her voice. Yates had given her that gift, the gift of belonging. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the time Sarah was 10, James was 8, and Emma was 5. The Ormond Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the territory. They had weathered droughts and market crashes, rustlers and disputes with neighboring ranches, and through it all, Lila and Yates had stood together, making decisions as partners and facing every challenge as a team. Lila had become known throughout Apache Junction as a capable businesswoman in her own right. She handled much of the ranch's bookkeeping and correspondence, and she had a sharp eye for spotting good opportunities. When a neighboring ranch went up for sale, it was Lila who first recognized the value of the property and convinced Yates that they should buy it. The acquisition doubled their land holdings and secured their position as one of the major ranching families in the area. She also became involved in the community, helping to establish a proper school in Apache Junction and serving on the board of the small library that opened in 1885. She wanted her children to have access to education and culture, to have choices in life that she had not had when she was young. Yates supported all of her endeavors, proud of his wife's accomplishments and never threatened by her success. They were true partners in every sense of the word, and their marriage had become something of a legend in Apache Junction. People talked about the half-Apache rancher and the woman who had arrived carrying another man's child, and how they had built something beautiful together against all odds. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Lila with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children in Samuel's capable care and took the train west. And for a week, they were just Yates and Lila, without the responsibilities of the ranch or parenthood. They walked along the waterfront, ate at fancy restaurants, went to the theater, and stayed in a hotel with actual running water and gas lighting. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city lights, Yates took Lila's hand and said, "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if I had not been riding past town that day?" "I try not to," Lila admitted. "It scares me to think how close I came to losing all of this. If you had taken a different route, if you had left an hour earlier or later, we might never have met." "I do not believe that," Yates said. "I think we were always meant to find each other one way or another. You were meant to be my wife, and I was meant to be Sarah's father. Some things are just fate." "I used to think I did not believe in fate," Lila said. "I thought everything that happened to me was punishment for my mistakes, but now I see it differently. Now I think maybe every step of my journey, even the painful ones, was leading me to you. Then I am grateful for all of it," Yates said, pulling her close. "Even the pain, even the struggles, because they brought you to me. I would not change a single thing if it meant losing what we have." They returned to the ranch refreshed and reconnected, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The children had missed them terribly, but had managed fine under Samuel's care, and the ranch had run smoothly in their absence. It was good to know that they had built something solid, something that could survive without their constant attention. As the children grew older, each of them developed their own interests and personalities. Sarah remained passionate about the ranch and announced at age 12 that she intended to run it someday. Yates began teaching her everything he knew about cattle ranching and land management, and Lila taught her how to manage the business side. James, as predicted, showed a talent for numbers and a love of books. He talked about going to university someday, maybe becoming a lawyer or a banker. Emma was the artist of the family, always drawing or painting or making up elaborate stories. Lila and Yates encouraged all of their interests, wanting them to have the freedom to choose their own paths. They had worked hard to build security for their children, and they wanted that security to include the ability to follow their dreams. The years brought other changes too. Arizona became a state in 1912, and with statehood came new opportunities and challenges. The old frontier ways were fading, replaced by telegraph lines and automobiles and modern conveniences that would have seemed like magic to the young couple who had started their life together in 1878. But through all the changes, the core of their family remained the same, built on love and commitment and the promises they had made to each other. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1915, at the age of 83. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had loved, and the entire community turned out for his funeral. He had lived to see all 3 children grow into capable young adults, and he had died knowing that the ranch he had helped build would continue for generations. His death hit the family hard, particularly Yates, who had known Samuel his entire life. But they took comfort in knowing he had lived a full life and had been surrounded by family at the end. Sarah, now a capable young woman of 23 running much of the ranch's day-to-day operations, took charge of making sure Samuel's wishes were respected and his legacy honored. James had indeed gone to university, studying law in California, but he returned to Arizona to practice and to help the family with legal matters. Emma had married a kind young man who worked as a photographer, and they lived in town but visited the ranch regularly. And through it all, Lila and Yates remained each other's constant, their love as strong at 60 as it had been at 25. They still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset, still talked about everything and nothing, still found joy in each other's company. One evening, as they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Sarah stood up to make a toast. She was now 52 years old herself, a respected rancher and businesswoman, and she commanded attention when she spoke. "I want to say something about my parents," she began, looking at Lila and Yates with obvious affection. "Everyone knows our family's story, how my mother came to Apache Junction carrying me, how my father gave me his name and raised me as his own. But what people do not always understand is what that gift meant, not just to me but to all of us." She paused, emotion making her voice thick. "My father taught me that family is not about blood. It is about showing up every day and choosing to love someone, choosing to be there through the good times and the hard times. He chose me before I was even born, and he has never once made me feel like I was anything less than completely his. That is the greatest gift a father can give a child." She turned to Lila. "And my mother taught me about courage and strength. She faced judgment and hardship with grace, and she built a life that many people thought was impossible. She showed me that mistakes do not define us, but how we respond to them does. By now, there was not a dry eye in the room. Lila was openly crying, and Yates had his arm around her, his own eyes bright with tears. Sarah raised her glass. To my parents, who built a love story that has lasted half a century and a family that will last for generations. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. Everyone raised their glasses and echoed the toast, and Lila looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren and felt a sense of completion. This was what she had been working toward all those years ago when she had stepped off that stagecoach, desperate and alone. She had not known it then, but she had been searching for exactly this, a place to belong and people to love, and a legacy that would outlast her own life. After the party ended and the guests had gone home, Lila and Yates returned to the house that had been their home for over 50 years. They walked slowly now, their movements careful with age, but they still held hands like young lovers. "You remember that first night I brought you here?" Yates asked as they stood in the living room. "You thought the cabin was the most beautiful thing you had ever seen, even though it was dusty and empty." "It was beautiful," Lila said. "It was hope. It was a second chance. It was the beginning of everything that mattered." "I knew that day that I was going to marry you," Yates confessed. "I did not admit it to myself for a few weeks, but I knew. When I saw you sitting on that rock, crying but not defeated, strong even in your desperation, I knew you were the one I had been waiting for." "I fell in love with you so fast it terrified me," Lila admitted. "I thought I was being foolish again, trusting too easily. But you were different from anyone I had ever known. You saw me, the real me, not just my mistakes or my circumstances. You gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be." They made their way to their bedroom, helping each other with the little tasks that had become harder with age. As they lay in bed together, Lila thought about everything they had been through, all the challenges they had faced and overcome, all the joy they had shared. "I would do it all again," she said softly. "Every single moment, the good and the bad, because it brought me here to you." "Me too," Yates said, pulling her close. "I love you, Lila Ormond. I have loved you for 50 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." "I love you too," Lila whispered. "Thank you for saying that the baby gets your name too. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for everything." They fell asleep in each other's arms, just as they had done for thousands of nights before. And outside, the Arizona night settled over the ranch they had built together, a testament to the power of love and choice and the courage to start over. The morning sun rose over the ranch as it had done for decades, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. Lila woke first, as she usually did, and lay for a moment watching Yates sleep. His hair was completely white now, his face lined with the marks of a life well lived, but to her, he was still the handsome young cowboy who had offered her hope when she had none. She thought about Sarah, sleeping in the master bedroom of her own ranch house a few miles away with her husband and children. She thought about James in town with his law practice and his family. She thought about Emma and her photographer husband and their artistic children. She thought about all the grandchildren who carried the Ormond name and the values that she and Yates had worked so hard to instill. This was their legacy, not just the land and the cattle and the buildings, but the family they had created through love and choice and determination. They had taken broken pieces, a woman carrying another man's child and a man who had never quite felt like he belonged, and they had built something whole and beautiful and lasting. Yates stirred and opened his eyes, smiling when he saw her watching him. "Good morning, my love," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning," Lila replied, leaning in to kiss him. "Ready for another day with you," Yates said, pulling her close. "Always." And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the ranch that had been their home and their heart for over 50 years, Lila and Yates Ormond began another day together, still in love, still partners, still grateful for the twist of fate that had brought a desperate woman and a compassionate cowboy together on a dusty Arizona afternoon, and given them both exactly what they needed: a family, a home, and a love that would last forever. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and life on the ranch went on. Lila and Yates spent their final years surrounded by the family they had built, watching with pride as their children and grandchildren carried on their legacy. They faced the challenges of aging together, supporting each other through illness and loss, never losing the connection that had sustained them for so many decades. When Yates passed away peacefully at the age of 89, holding Lila's hand as he had done for 63 years of marriage, it was Sarah who stood beside her mother at the funeral and reminded her of something Yates had always said: that love does not end with death, but continues on in the lives we have touched and the family we leave behind. Lila lived for another 5 years after Yates, and in that time, she made sure that every grandchild and great-grandchild knew the story of how she had come to Apache Junction carrying another man's child, and how a cowboy had said that the baby gets his name too. She wanted them to understand that family is not defined by blood or circumstances, but by love and choice and the willingness to stand by each other no matter what challenges life brings. When Lila finally joined Yates, they buried her next to him on the hill overlooking the ranch, and her tombstone read, "Lila Patterson Ormond, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she found love when she needed it most." The ranch continued to thrive under Sarah's capable management, passed down through the generations just as Yates had dreamed. And whenever the family gathered for holidays or celebrations, someone would always tell the story of how it all began, on a hot Arizona afternoon in 1878, when a desperate young woman and a compassionate cowboy found each other and built a love story that would echo through the generations, proving that the most beautiful beginnings can sometimes come from the most unlikely circumstances. The Ormond name became synonymous with integrity and compassion in Apache Junction, and the family never forgot the lesson that Yates and Lila had taught them: that everyone deserves a second chance, that love is a choice we make every day, and that the truest measure of a person is not where they come from, but how they treat others when they are at their most vulnerable. Years later, when Sarah's own granddaughter faced an unexpected pregnancy, it was Sarah who sat her down and told her the story of her great-grandmother Lila and her great-grandfather Yates, reminding her that mistakes do not define us, and that there are still good people in the world who will offer help when it is needed most. The cycle of compassion continued, a legacy more valuable than land or cattle or money, a legacy of love that would never fade. And so the story of Lila and Yates lived on, a testament to the power of second chances and the transformative nature of unconditional love, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful families are not born but chosen, and that true love means accepting someone completely, including their past and all that comes with it. Their story became part of the fabric of Apache Junction itself, told and retold until it became legend, but always with the same essential truth at its heart: that a good man saw a woman who needed help, and instead of turning away, he offered her not just a job but a family, not just acceptance but love, and in doing so, he gave her the greatest gift of all, the chance to be whole again. The ranch still stands today, worked by the descendants of Yates and Lila Ormond, and on the hill where they are buried, you can still see their tombstones side by side, united in death as they were in life. And if you listen carefully on a quiet evening, when the desert wind whispers through the mesquite, and the sun sets in glorious color over the land they loved, You can almost hear the echo of their story, a love song written in the dust and sagebrush of the Arizona territory, a reminder that the best stories are the ones where love conquers all and where family is defined not by blood, but by the choices we make and the promises we keep. Their love story became a beacon for others facing similar struggles, showing that redemption is always possible and that true love sees beyond surface judgments to the heart of a person. The values they instilled in their children, about acceptance, compassion, and the importance of giving people second chances, rippled out through generations, affecting not just their own family but the entire community of Apache Junction and beyond. And in the end, that was the true legacy of Lila and Yates Ormond, not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a living example of what happens when one person chooses to see the humanity in another, when compassion triumphs over judgment, and when love is given freely without condition or reservation. They proved that the most profound acts of love are often the simplest. Opening your home to someone who has nowhere to go, giving your name to a child who needs one, choosing to see potential instead of past mistakes, and standing by your promises even when the world says you do not have to. Their story reminds us all that we have the power to change someone's life with our choices, that kindness is never wasted, and that the families we create through love and intention can be just as strong, if not stronger, than the families we are born into. Lila and Yates showed the world that love is not about perfection but about acceptance, not about where you start but about where you choose to go together, and that the truest form of love is the kind that says, I choose you every single day, through every challenge and every triumph, until the very end.